This woman just signed her own arrest warrant and she doesn't even know it yet. 30,000 feet in the air, there is nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. But for one senior flight attendant, the friendly skies were about to become a courtroom, and the aisle, her cell. When Brianna Miller decided that a 15-year-old boy's life support machine was an inconvenience she wasn't willing to tolerate, she didn't just break protocol, she broke a father's heart and ignited a fury that would ground the entire airline. What happens when authority turns into cruelty? And how far will a father go to save his son when the person supposed to protect them becomes the threat? Fasten your seatbelts. You are not ready for the turbulence of justice that is about to hit. The humidity in Miami International Airport was sticky, even inside the air-conditioned terminal, but Dylan Washington felt a different kind of heat. It was the heat of 1,000 invisible eyes. Beside him sat his son, Jordan. At 15, Jordan had the height of a linebacker, but the lung capacity of a sparrow. Cystic fibrosis had been the uninvited guest in their lives since Jordan was born, and today, that guest was heavy. Jordan sat in his wheelchair, the soft hum of his portable oxygen concentrator, POC, a sleek, FAA-approved Inogen 1G5 resting in his lap. A clear cannula tube ran to his nose. He looked tired. The trip to Seattle was for a specialist consultation, a Hail Mary for a new treatment protocol. "You doing okay, Jay?" Dylan asked, wiping a bead of sweat from his own forehead. He checked the battery life on the POC for the third time. 98%. He had 4 spare batteries in his carry-on. He was a man who prepared for everything. "I'm good, Dad. Just ready to get there." Jordan wheezed slightly, forcing a smile. He was a good kid, rarely complained, even when the world stared. And people were staring. "Zone 1, first class and priority boarding," the gate agent announced. Dylan stood up, gripping the handles of Jordan's chair. They had priority boarding specifically for this reason, to get Jordan settled with his medical equipment before the chaos of general boarding ensued. Dylan handed their tickets to the gate agent, a kind woman named Maria, who smiled warmly. "Have a safe flight, Mr. Washington. The crew is aware of the medical device." "Thank you, Maria," Dylan said, relieved. They moved down the jet bridge, the transition from the noisy terminal to the hollow echo of the tunnel, signaling the start of their journey. They were flying Global Air, Flight 492. Dylan had flown them for years. Usually, the crews were fantastic. Usually, as they breached the cabin door, they were greeted not by a smile, but by a heavy sigh. Standing at the galley, cross-armed and tapping a manicured red fingernail against her elbow, was Brianna Miller. Her name tag identified her as the purser, the head flight attendant. She was in her late 50s, with hair sprayed into a helmet of blonde rigidity and eyes that scanned passengers like a bouncer looking for fake IDs. "Boarding pass," Brianna said, not looking at Dylan, but staring directly at the oxygen concentrator in Jordan's lap. Dylan held them out. "We're in 4A and 4B. Priority, medical." Brianna snatched the passes. She looked at Jordan, then at the machine. Her nose wrinkled slightly, as if she smelled something spoiled. "That bag," she pointed a long finger at the POC. "It needs to go in the overhead bin. No bags on laps during takeoff." Dylan felt the first prickle of warning on the back of his neck. "This isn't a bag, ma'am. It's a portable oxygen concentrator. It's an FAA-approved medical device. He needs it to breathe. It stays with him." Brianna's eyes finally met Dylan's. They were cold, devoid of the customer service sparkle usually mandated by the airline. "I know what the manual says, sir. But if we hit turbulence, that heavy box becomes a projectile. I'm responsible for the safety of this cabin, and I'm responsible for the life of my son," Dylan said, his voice dropping an octave, firm but polite. "The airline cleared it. Gate cleared it. It's strapped to him. It's not going in the bin." Brianna stared at him for a long, uncomfortable 3 seconds. The line of passengers behind them was starting to form in the jet bridge. She huffed, a sharp exhalation of annoyance. "Fine, but if it beeps during my safety demo, I'm moving it." "It doesn't beep unless there's a problem," Jordan said softly, his voice trembling slightly. He hated confrontation. "Just get in your seats," Brianna snapped, turning her back to organize a stack of napkins. Dylan wheeled Jordan to row 4. He helped his son transfer to the window seat, 4A, and carefully stowed the wheelchair with the assistance of a younger, much kinder flight attendant named Jocelyn. "Sorry about Brianna," Jocelyn whispered as she helped Dylan lift his carry-on. She's on a double shift. She's a bit on edge. On edge is one thing, Dylan murmured, buckling Jordan in. That was something else. Dylan sat in 4B. He checked the POC again. The flow was steady. Jordan closed his eyes, leaning his head against the window. Dylan took a deep breath. Just 6 hours, he told himself. Just 6 hours, and we're in Seattle. He didn't know that for Jordan, 6 hours was a lifetime he might not have. The plane reached cruising altitude smoothly. The seatbelt sign pinged off. The cabin filled with the low roar of engines and the rustle of passengers settling in. Dylan opened his book, but he couldn't read. He kept watching the crew. Brianna was working the first-class cabin alone for the moment, as Jocelyn was in the back preparing the beverage cart for economy. Brianna moved with an aggressive efficiency, slamming overhead bins that were already closed and stomping down the aisle. Every time she passed row 4, she glared. It wasn't just a look. It was a targeted laser of disdain. Dylan realized quickly this wasn't just about a bag. He saw how she smiled, albeit tightly, at the businessman in 3B, and how she fawned over the elderly couple in 2A. But when her eyes landed on Jordan, a young black kid in a hoodie with a tube in his nose, the hospitality evaporated. "Drink?" Brianna barked, stopping at their row. "Water, please." "No ice," Dylan said. "And him?" She gestured vaguely at Jordan. "Ginger ale," Jordan whispered. "Speak up," Brianna said, not leaning in. "I can't hear you over that." Machine. The machine was making a rhythmic puff-click sound, barely louder than a whisper. The ambient engine noise drowned it out completely for anyone not sitting directly next to it. "He said ginger ale," Dylan said, his jaw tightening. Brianna poured the drinks, filling the cups to the brim so they were impossible to pick up without spilling. She slammed them onto the tray table. A splash of ginger ale hit the armrest, dangerously close to the POC's intake vent. "Hey!" Dylan grabbed a napkin, quickly dabbing the liquid. "Careful. This is electronic. Maybe if it wasn't cluttering up my workspace, accidents wouldn't happen," Brianna sneered. She didn't apologize. She moved to row 5. Dylan wiped the armrest dry, his heart pounding. "Calm down," he thought. "Don't make a scene. That's what she wants. She wants a reason to kick you off or have security waiting." He knew the reality. A large black man raising his voice on a plane rarely ended well for the man. He had to be smarter. An hour passed. Jordan fell asleep. His breathing was shallow, handled rhythmically by the machine. The gentle puff of oxygen was a lifeline. Then, the turbulence hit. It wasn't a slight bump. The plane dropped a sudden, stomach-lurching freefall that elicited screams from the back of the plane. The captain came over the intercom, voice urgent. "Folks, we've hit some unexpected rough air. Flight attendants, take your seats immediately." The plane shook violently. Bags rattled. Brianna, who had been in the galley, stumbled. She grabbed onto the back of Dylan's seat to steady herself. As the plane pitched to the right, her hips slammed into Jordan's shoulder. Jordan woke with a start, gasping. The movement had jostled the cannula in his nose. He reached up to adjust it. "Stop moving," Brianna yelled, her face inches from Jordan's. She was gripping the seat back, white-knuckled. "He's just fixing his tube," Dylan shouted over the rattling cabin. "That machine is a hazard," Brianna screamed, panic and irrational anger mixing in her eyes. "I told you, it's not secure. It is strapped down." Dylan pointed to the extra belt extender securing the POC to Jordan's waist. The plane jolted again. Brianna lost her footing and fell into the aisle. She scrambled up, her face red, hair disheveled. She looked at the Washingtons not as passengers, but as the source of her loss of control. "That's it," she hissed. The turbulence lasted another 3 minutes before smoothing out into a manageable chop. The seatbelt sign stayed on. But Brianna didn't sit down. She stood up, straightened her blazer, and marched toward row 4. She wasn't holding a drink menu. She wasn't holding a trash bag. She was holding a pair of heavy-duty plastic flex cuffs, usually reserved for unruly passengers. But she didn't aim for Dylan's hands. She aimed for the machine. "Ma'am, sit down." A passenger across the aisle, a man named Greg, called out. "The light is on." Brianna ignored him. She loomed over Jordan. "Captain said, secure the cabin." "I am securing the cabin." "Don't touch that," Dylan said, his voice low and dangerous. He unbuckled his seatbelt, defying the light. "Sit down, sir, or you will be restrained," Brianna shouted, drawing the attention of the entire front cabin. "This device is a loose projectile. It must be stowed in the overhead bin now." "He is using it." Dylan stood up, blocking her path to his son. "He cannot breathe without it." "He's breathing fine," Brianna argued, looking at Jordan, who was wide-eyed and hyperventilating from fear. "Look at him. He's fine. It goes up. Now." "No." Brianna's eyes narrowed. She reached for the flight interphone handset on the wall near row 1. She punched a code. "Captain," she said, loud enough for the first 5 rows to hear. "We have a passenger refusal to comply with safety orders in 4B. Creating a disturbance, possible threat level 2. She hung up and looked at Dylan with a terrifying smirk. "Now, you can hand over the machine, or we can divert the plane, and you can explain to the marshals why you endangered this flight." Dylan looked at his son. Jordan was clutching the machine, tears streaming down his face. "Dad," Jordan wheezed. "Dad, don't. Just put it up for a second. I can hold my breath. Please don't get arrested." The fear in his son's voice broke Dylan. He knew that if he fought physically, he'd be tackled. He'd be the violent passenger on the news. He had to play the long game. "Fine," Dylan said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "But if anything happens to him, drama queen," Brianna muttered. She stepped forward, not waiting for Dylan to do it. She reached over Jordan, unclipped the strap, and yanked the 5-pound machine out of the boy's lap. The cannula ripped from Jordan's nose. "Hey, watch it," Dylan yelled. Brianna didn't care. She opened the overhead bin above row 4, shoved the expensive medical device inside next to a roller bag, and slammed the door shut. "Now," she dusted her hands, "sit down and shut up." Jordan sat back, his chest heaving. Without the supplemental oxygen, his lungs had to work 3 times as hard. The cabin pressure, sitting at an equivalent of 8,000 feet, was already thinner than ground air. For a healthy person, it's unnoticeable. For a boy with 40% lung function, it was like breathing through a straw while running a marathon. Brianna returned to her jump seat, looking satisfied. She had won. Dylan watched Jordan. He watched the rise and fall of his chest. It was too fast. Too shallow. "Just breathe slow, Jay," Dylan whispered, grabbing his son's hand. "Just slow. I'll get it back as soon as the light goes off." I can't," Jordan gasped, clutching his throat. His lips, previously a healthy pink, were beginning to take on a terrifying shade of pale blue. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated, a glowing orange command that felt less like a safety measure and more like a cage. Outside the window, the clouds had turned a bruised purple, the turbulence persisting as a low, rumbling vibration that shook the floorboards. But the real storm was happening in seat 4A. Dylan watched the seconds tick by on his watch. It had been 4 minutes since the machine was locked away. 4 minutes in a pressurized cabin where the partial pressure of oxygen was already significantly lower than sea level. For a boy with cystic fibrosis, whose mucus-clogged lungs struggled to facilitate gas exchange even on a good day, this was the equivalent of slowly tightening a plastic bag over his head. "Dad," Jordan whispered. The word didn't come out as a sound, but as a shape of his lips. He was gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles were the color of bone. "I know, son. I know. Just try to take deep breaths. Expand the diaphragm," Dylan coached, his own heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He unbuckled his seatbelt. He didn't care about the light anymore. He reached up toward the call button and pressed it. Ding. He waited. 10 seconds. 20. He pressed it again, 3 times in rapid succession. Ding, ding, ding. From the galley, he saw Brianna look up from her jump seat. She didn't move. She simply stared at the light on the panel, then made direct eye contact with Dylan. She shook her head slowly, mouthing the word, "Sit." "She's not coming," Dylan realized with a cold jolt of horror. "She's punishing us." Jordan let out a wheeze that sounded wet and rattling. His head lolled to the side, hitting the window shade. Dylan looked at his son's face. The panic was fading from Jordan's eyes, replaced by a terrifying, glossy vacancy. Hypoxia was setting in. The brain was starving. "Jordan? Jordan? Look at me." Dylan snapped his fingers in front of the boy's face. Jordan blinked slowly, his eyelids heavy, like he was drugged. "Tired." Jordan slurred. Just gonna sleep. No, no sleeping, Dylan shouted, his voice cracking. Stay with me, Jay. Dylan lunged into the aisle. He didn't stand up fully. The plane bucked, throwing him off balance. But he grabbed the overhead bin, the very one hiding the lifeline. He frantically clawed at the latch. Sit down, Brianna shrieked. She unbuckled her harness and charged down the aisle, abandoning her own safety. I told you to sit down. You are interfering with a flight crew member. He's passing out, Dylan screamed, wrestling with the latch. Give me the machine. Brianna reached him and shoved him. She was surprisingly strong, fueled by adrenaline and rage. She slammed her hand over the bin latch, blocking it with her body. Get back in your seat or I will have the pilot divert and you will be arrested for assault, she yelled, her face contorted. He is faking it. I see this all the time. Kids holding their breath to get their way. I am not risking a projectile injury for a tantrum. Look at him. Dylan grabbed Brianna's wrist, yanking her arm away from the bin. Look at his lips, you crazy woman. They're blue. The commotion woke the cabin. Heads popped up over seatbacks. The businessman in 3B lowered his noise-canceling headphones. Greg, the man across the aisle in 4C, stood up. Hey, Greg said, his voice booming. Lady, the kid looks bad. Stay out of this. Brianna whipped her head around, pointing a finger at Greg. Federal violation. Interference. Sit down. While Brianna was distracted, screaming at Greg, Dylan popped the latch. The bin door swung open. He saw the Inogen 1G5 sitting there, its green light still pulsing, humming faithfully in the dark. He reached for it. Brianna swung back around and grabbed the strap of the machine. No, they grappled for it, a tug of war over a medical device at 35,000 feet. It was absurd. It was grotesque. Let go, Dylan roared, tapping into a reservoir of strength fueled by pure parental terror. I am the purser. My word is law, Brianna screeched. She yanked hard. The strap snapped out of her hand, but the momentum sent the machine swinging. It hit the side of the bin with a loud crack before Dylan secured it. He dropped into his seat, ignoring Brianna, and immediately looked at Jordan. Jordan wasn't moving. His head was slumped forward, chin against his chest. His hands had slid off the armrests and were dangling limp at his sides. Jordan? Dylan whispered. He jammed the cannula back into his son's nose. He checked the machine. The screen was cracked from the impact against the bin, but the motor was running. Oxygen was flowing. Jordan, breathe. Breathe for me. Nothing. The chest didn't rise. Dylan placed 2 fingers on Jordan's neck. The pulse was there, but it was thready, fast, erratic. Then, Jordan's body stiffened. His back arched off the seat. His eyes rolled back into his head, exposing the whites, and he began to convulse. A hypoxic seizure. Oh God, Dylan cried out. He's seizing. Help. I need help. Brianna stood in the aisle, straightening her blazer. She looked at the seizing boy, then at Dylan. For a split second, a flicker of doubt crossed her face, the realization that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a performance. But her pride was a fortress she couldn't abandon. He's having a fit because you're encouraging him, Brianna said, though her voice wavered slightly. Control your child. Shut up, Greg yelled from across the aisle. Just shut the hell up. Dylan ignored them all. He unbuckled Jordan, pulling his son's convulsing body across his lap, trying to protect his head from hitting the window or the seat back. Is there a doctor? Dylan screamed to the cabin, his voice raw, tearing through the recycled air. Is there a doctor on this plane? My son is dying. The silence that followed Dylan's plea lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt like an eternity. Then, the cabin erupted. Get a doctor, a woman in row 5 shouted. Call the pilot, another voice rang out. From the back of the first-class cabin, in row 2, a man stood up. He was older, wearing a tweed jacket, with silver glasses perched on a sharp nose. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't look at the seatbelt sign. He moved with the quiet authority of someone who had commanded emergency rooms for decades. I am a physician, the man announced. His voice was calm, cutting through the panic like a scalpel. He stepped toward row 4. Brianna stepped in his path. She held up a hand. Sir, the seatbelt sign is on. You need to return to your... The man didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. He looked Brianna in the eye and said, Move, or I will have you charged with reckless endangerment before we touch the ground. The sheer weight of his tone froze her. It wasn't a shout, it was a fact. Brianna stepped aside, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The doctor knelt in the aisle beside Dylan. "I'm Dr. Robert Hansen. Tell me what he has." "Cystic fibrosis." Dylan choked out, holding Jordan, whose convulsions were slowing into a terrifying stillness. "He needs oxygen." She took it away. "He was without it for, I don't know, 5 minutes? Maybe more?" Dr. Hansen's face tightened. He immediately put a hand on Jordan's chest and checked his pulse again. He leaned down, listening to the boy's lungs. "Jocelyn!" Dr. Hansen yelled toward the galley. He recognized the younger flight attendant who had been cowering near the cockpit door, unsure of whether to intervene against her supervisor. "Get the POB, portable oxygen bottle, from the emergency kit. Now, and get the AED just in case." Jocelyn didn't look at Brianna. She moved. She grabbed the bright yellow oxygen bottle and the medical kit and sprinted to row 4. "He has a machine," Brianna said, pointing at the inogen unit Dylan was clutching. "He has his own. He doesn't need the ship's supply. His machine flows at 5 liters max." Dr. Hansen snapped, not looking up. "He's in respiratory failure. He needs high flow." "Step back." Jocelyn handed the mask to the doctor. He placed it over Jordan's face and cranked the valve to the maximum setting. "Come on, son," Hansen whispered. "Come on." The cabin was dead silent. Every passenger was craning their neck. Greg, the passenger in 4C, had his phone out. He wasn't just watching, he was recording. He had the camera trained directly on Brianna, who was now standing with her back to the cockpit door, her face pale, arms crossed defensively. "You're getting all this, right?" Dylan asked Greg, tears streaming down his face as he stroked Jordan's hair. "Every second, brother," Greg said grimly. "She's not walking away from this." Brianna saw the phone. Her eyes widened. She lunged for Greg. "You cannot film crew members. Give me that phone." Greg pulled the phone back. Standing up to his full height, he was 6'4" and built like a brick house. "Touch me," Greg said, his voice dangerously low. "Go ahead. Make my lawsuit a retirement fund. Touch me." Brianna recoiled. She looked around the cabin. She had lost the room. She had lost control. "Captain needs to know," Jocelyn said. She was trembling, holding the emergency kit open. "I'm calling the cockpit." "No," Brianna hissed, grabbing Jocelyn's arm. "We manage the cabin. We don't disturb the flight deck for a medical issue unless it's a code blue. He's breathing." "Look, he's breathing." "He is unconscious," Jocelyn shouted, ripping her arm away. It was the first time she had ever raised her voice to a superior. "He is hypoxic." "I am calling the captain." Jocelyn grabbed the interphone. She didn't use the standard call. She punched in the emergency code, 4 chimes that rang loudly throughout the plane. Ding dong, ding dong. The door to the cockpit clicked. The first officer, a man named Miller, no relation to Brianna, opened the door, stepping out. "What's the problem? We have a squawk on the..." He stopped. He saw the scene, the doctor kneeling in the aisle, the unconscious boy with an oxygen mask, the father weeping, the passengers standing up. "Medical emergency," Dr. Hansen said, looking up at the first officer. "Status epilepticus induced by severe hypoxia. His stats are dropping. We are at 88% saturation and falling. You need to get this plane on the ground. Now." The first officer looked at Brianna. "Why wasn't I notified sooner?" I was assessing the situation," Brianna stammered. "The passenger was non-compliant with the carry-on policy. I was securing the cabin." "She took his life support," Dylan yelled, pointing at her. "She took his machine and put it in the bin while he was using it." The first officer's face went ashen. He looked at the machine on Dylan's lap, then back at Brianna. The look he gave her was one of pure disbelief. "Get us on the ground," Dr. Hansen repeated. "If we stay at this altitude, his heart is going to stop." "I don't have the equipment here to intubate him." The first officer nodded. "We're diverting to Atlanta. It's 20 minutes out. Can you keep him alive for 20 minutes? "I'm going to try," Hansen said, "but he needs an ambulance on the tarmac. Pediatric ICU team." "Done," the first officer said. He turned back to the cockpit. "Captain, we are declaring an emergency. Squawk 7,700. Diversion to ATL immediately." The cockpit door closed. The engine's pitch changed almost instantly. The nose of the plane dipped, They were descending. Fast. Brianna stood alone in the galley. No one looked at her. No one spoke to her. She pressed her back against the metal wall of the lavatory, her hands shaking. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the rulebook she worshipped wasn't going to save her. "Come on, Jordan," Dylan pleaded, gripping his son's cold hand. "Don't you quit on me. We're going down. We're landing. Just hold on." Jordan didn't move. The only sound was the hiss of the emergency oxygen tank, a sound that seemed to be counting down the remaining minutes of his life. Dylan looked up at Brianna one last time. His eyes were dry now. The sadness had burned away, leaving only a cold, hard promise. "You better pray he wakes up," Dylan said softly. "Because if he doesn't, jail will be the safest place for you." The descent into Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was not the gentle glide of a commercial airliner. It was a tactical drop. The pilots, aware that every second at cruising altitude was a second of oxygen, starvation for the boy in 4A, pushed the Boeing 737 to its structural limits. The speed brakes groaned as they tore against the wind, shuddering the entire fuselage. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Dr. Hansen was sweating, his hand cramping from holding the oxygen mask tight against Jordan's face to ensure a seal. "His heart rate is bradycardic," Hansen murmured to Dylan, checking his watch. "He's dropping below 50 beats per minute. We need the ground. Now, stay with me, Jay. Stay with me," Dylan chanted, a broken prayer. He held Jordan's limp hand, rubbing it to keep the circulation moving. "Cabin crew, prepare for immediate landing," the captain's voice boomed. It wasn't the usual practice calm. It was tight, angry. Brianna sat in her jump seat, staring straight ahead. She had stopped trying to make eye contact with the other passengers. She was mentally rehearsing her report. Passenger was non-compliant. Equipment was unsecured. Safety priority. I followed the manual. She clung to the manual like a shield, unaware that the manual didn't cover stripping life support from a disabled minor. The wheels hit the tarmac with a violent thud, the impact jarring Jordan's head against his father's chest. The reverse thrusters roared like dragons, throwing everyone forward against their belts. The plane braked hard, decelerating rapidly, burning rubber as it exited the runway at the first available taxiway. They didn't go to a gate. They stopped on the apron. Through the window, Dylan saw the flashing red and white lights. A swarm of vehicles, ambulances, fire trucks, and 3 black SUVs with lights flashing in the grille. "Remain seated." The first officer came over the intercom. "Medical personnel are boarding." The front door blew open. The slide wasn't deployed, but a mobile stair truck had raced to meet them. 3 paramedics in high-vis vests sprinted onto the plane, carrying a heavy trauma bag and a portable stretcher. "Where is he?" the lead paramedic shouted. "Row 4, Jocelyn yelled, pointing. "Male, 15. Cystic fibrosis, hypoxic seizure." The paramedics swarmed the row. Dr. Hansen stepped back, giving a rapid-fire handover. "Status epilepticus. O2 saturation bottomed out at 82%. Pulse 45. Pupils sluggish. He needs intubation immediately." Dylan watched, helpless, as they cut Jordan's hoodie open, placing ECG leads on his chest. They lifted his limp body out of the seat. He looked so small, so fragile, and onto the stretcher. "Dad coming?" the paramedic asked. "I'm coming," Dylan said, grabbing the broken Inogen machine from the floor. It was evidence. "Sir, leave the bag," Brianna spoke up automatically from her jump seat. "You can't take luggage on the ambulance." Dylan stopped. He turned to her. The look on his face made the paramedic pause. "This," Dylan held up the machine, "is the weapon you used to try and kill my son. Let's go, sir," the paramedic urged. They rushed down the stairs. As Dylan stepped onto the tarmac, the humid Atlanta air hit him. They loaded Jordan into the ambulance. The sirens wailed, a sound that pierced Dylan's soul. "Go with him," a deep voice said from behind Dylan. Dylan turned. Standing at the bottom of the stairs were 2 officers from the Atlanta Police Department and a man in a suit FBI. Because the crime occurred in the air, federal jurisdiction applied. "I need to make a statement," Dylan said, trembling. "We have your info," the FBI agent said. "Go save your son. We'll handle the rest." Dylan climbed into the ambulance. The doors slammed shut, and the vehicle peeled away. Back on the plane, the drama was far from over. The passengers were told to remain seated. The air conditioning was humming, but the silence was heavy. Brianna unbuckled her harness and stood up, smoothing her skirt. She walked toward the cockpit door, intending to speak to the captain. "I need to file the incident report regarding the passenger in 4B, she said loudly, trying to regain her authority. "He assaulted a crew member, and—" "Sit down, Brianna," the captain said. He was standing in the open cockpit doorway. He was a man of few words, a former Air Force pilot. He looked at her with pure disgust. "Captain, I was securing the cabin for turbulence. The device was—" I said, "Sit down." 2 heavy footsteps echoed on the jet bridge stairs. The FBI agent and the 2 Atlanta PD officers boarded the plane. They didn't look at the passengers. They looked at Jocelyn. "Who is the purser?" the agent asked. Jocelyn, tears in her eyes, pointed a shaking finger at Brianna. "She is Brianna Miller." Brianna stiffened. She forced a smile. "Officers, thank goodness. That man, the father, he was aggressive. I want to press charges for assault." He grabbed my arm. The FBI agent walked up to Brianna. He was a tall man with eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by a flight attendant's badge. "Brianna Miller?" "Yes. I'm the purser. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Brianna blinked. She laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Excuse me? I think you're confused. The passenger. You are under arrest for federal assault, reckless endangerment of a minor, and interference with a medical device resulting in bodily harm," the agent recited, his voice flat. He spun her around. "No, no," Brianna shrieked as the cold steel cuffs clicked onto her wrists. "I followed protocol. It's in the manual. You can't arrest me. I am the victim here." "You pulled the plug on a dying kid, lady," the Atlanta cop muttered, grabbing her arm. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." As they marched her down the aisle, a strange thing happened. There was no booing, no cheering, just the sound of 150 phone cameras clicking. Greg, in seat 4C, stood up as she passed. He held his phone right in her face. "Smile, Brianna," Greg said, cold as ice. "You're going to be famous." She was dragged off the plane, kicking and screaming about FAA regulations, her polished image shattering into the reality of a federal perp walk. Dylan sat in the waiting room of the Grady Memorial Hospital ICU. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. It had been 3 hours. He hadn't washed his hands. He wanted the residue of the plane, the germs, the bad luck off him, but he couldn't leave the door. A doctor pushed through the swinging doors. "Dr. Evans." Dylan stood up, his knees cracking. "How is he?" "He's stable," Dr. Evans said, but her face was grave. "We had to induce a coma to let the brain swelling go down. The hypoxia was severe. His CO2 levels were critical. The stress on his heart. Mr. Washington, with his CF, his lungs are already compromised. This event has pushed him into acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS." Dylan felt the room spin. Is he going to wake up? "We don't know yet," she said honestly. "The next 48 hours are critical. If the swelling doesn't go down, or if he catches a secondary infection from the aspiration, we just have to wait." Dylan collapsed back into the chair, burying his face in his hands. He felt like he had failed. He promised to protect him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Then again. Then a continuous vibration. He pulled it out. He had 400 missed messages. He opened his text thread with his sister, Sarah. There was a link. Text. "Dylan, oh my God. Is this real? It's everywhere. It's on the news." He clicked the link. It was Twitter X, the #1 trending topic in the United States, replacing the Super Bowl and the election, was 3 words: Justice for Jordan. He clicked the hashtag. The top post was a video uploaded by user at Greg the Traveler. It was titled, "Flight Attendant Tries to Kill Kid for Protocol." The video had 12.4 million views. It had been posted 2 hours ago. Dylan watched it, the shaking camera, Brianna's sneering face, the way she ripped the machine away, the sound of Jordan gasping, the way she blocked the overhead bin, and the final shot, Dylan screaming for a doctor while holding his seizing son. The internet had not just reacted, it had declared war. The comments were a scrolling waterfall of fury. Asterisk, "I'm a flight attendant for 20 years. This is not protocol. She is a monster." Asterisk, "Name her. Shame her. Jail her." Asterisk, my son has CF. I am shaking, watching this. I would have broken that bin open. Asterisk at Global Air, explain this, now. Dylan scrolled down. It wasn't just comments, it was action. A TikTok lawyer with 5 million followers had already stitched the video, breaking down the charges. This isn't just negligence, the lawyer said, pointing at the green screen behind him. This is depraved heart assault. She knew the risk and acted anyway. She could be looking at 20 years federal. Then, the official statement from Global Air appeared. It was a screenshot of a press release. Global Air is aware of an incident on Flight 492. We are investigating the matter internally. The safety of our passengers is our priority. We apologize for the inconvenience. The internet tore the statement apart. Inconvenience? The kid is in a coma. Boycott Global Air. Short their stock. And they did. By the time the markets closed that afternoon, Global Air's stock had plummeted 12%, wiping out billions in market cap. Dylan's phone rang again. An unknown number. Hello? Mr. Washington? The voice was smooth, confident, and aggressive. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm a senior partner at Cole, Sterling & Associates. I'm in Atlanta. I've already seen the video. I've already spoken to the passengers. I want to represent you. I can't afford a lawyer like you, Dylan said tiredly. Mr. Washington, you won't pay a dime, Ethan said. I don't want your money. I want their blood. I'm going to make sure Global Air buys you a hospital by the time we're done. But more importantly, I'm going to make sure that woman never sees the sky again unless it's through the bars of a cell window. Are you in? Dylan looked through the glass window of the ICU. He saw Jordan lying there, a ventilator tube down his throat, machines beeping the rhythm of a life that was hanging by a thread. I'm in, Dylan said. Meanwhile, in the Clayton County Detention Center, Brianna Miller sat on a metal bench in a holding cell. She was still in her uniform, though the scarf had been taken, along with her shoes. She was pacing. I need to speak to the union rep, she yelled at the guard. This is a mistake. I have seniority. The guard, a large woman named Officer Tate, didn't look up from her paperwork. Union rep isn't coming, Miller. What do you mean? They have to protect me. Union issued a statement an hour ago, Tate said, turning a page. They denounced your actions, said you acted outside of scope and training. They're not funding your defense. Brianna stopped pacing. Her mouth fell open. They can't abandon me. I'm a purser. You're an inmate, Tate said. And you've got a bail hearing in the morning. But don't get your hopes up. The judge saw the video. What video? Brianna whispered. Tate stood up and walked to the bars. She held up her personal phone. The screen showed the video Greg had taken. It was paused on the frame where Brianna was blocking the overhead bin while Jordan turned blue. The whole world saw it, honey, Tate said. Even the other inmates know who you are. We had to put you in protective custody because general population wants to have a talk with the lady who chokes out sick kids. Brianna slumped against the cold cinder block wall. The fortress of her ego finally crumbled. There was no manual for this. There was no protocol to fix this. She was alone. And outside, the storm was just getting started. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta looked less like a hall of justice and more like a besieged fortress. It had been 18 months since Flight 492 touched down on that tarmac, but the public fury had not cooled. If anything, it had calcified into a hard, diamond-sharp demand for accountability. Outside the heavy oak doors, a sea of protesters surged against police barricades. They held signs that bobbed like angry waves. Breath is a right, no-fly list for bullies, and justice for Jordan. The chant, "We can't breathe," had taken on a new, specific resonance for the crowd, echoing the terrifying moments captured in the viral video that had now been viewed over 100 million times globally. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was refrigerated and silent, a stark contrast to the humid chaos outside. Every bench was filled. Journalists from every major network sat with sketchpads and laptops, ready to broadcast the fate of the woman who had become the face of corporate cruelty. Brianna Miller sat at the defense table. She was unrecognizable. The woman who had once stood in the galley like a queen inspecting her subjects was now a shrunken, gray figure. Her airline uniform, once her armor, had been replaced by a drab, ill-fitting blazer purchased by her public defender. She had been denied bail, deemed a flight risk after investigators found she had liquidated her savings and researched non-extradition countries shortly after her arrest. 18 months in county lockup had stripped the dye from her hair and the arrogance from her spine. She stared at her hands, which trembled slightly, unable to look at the gallery behind her. On the opposite side of the aisle sat the prosecution's star witness and the victim, Jordan Washington. He was 16 now, taller but frail. The hypoxia had left its mark. He sat in a motorized wheelchair, not because he couldn't walk, but because the exertion of walking long distances now left him gasping. A sleek, new oxygen concentrator hummed quietly at his feet, a constant reminder of what had been taken from him. Beside him, Dylan Washington sat like a stone statue. He wore a dark suit, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on the empty jury box. The trial had been a 2-week dismantling of Brianna's life. The prosecution, led by a fierce assistant U.S. attorney named Marcus Thorne, had not just argued negligence, he had argued malice. The jury had seen the video. They had seen it in slow motion. They watched Brianna block the bin. They watched her sneer. But the most damning testimony hadn't come from the video. It had come from her own colleagues. Jocelyn, the junior flight attendant, had taken the stand on day 3. She wept as she described the hierarchy of fear Brianna had instilled in the crew. She told us that passengers were cattle. Jocelyn had testified, her voice shaking. She said if you give them an inch, they take a mile. She said the medical bag was just a prop for sympathy. She didn't believe him. She didn't care. Then there was Dr. Hansen. The distinguished physician had walked the jury through the physiology of suffocation. This wasn't just holding your breath, he explained, using a diagram of the lungs. This was a chemical assault on the brain. By denying him that device, she was actively starving his cells of life. It is a miracle he isn't brain dead. It is a miracle he is here. Now, it was time for the closing arguments. Ethan Cole, representing the family in the civil suit but present for the criminal proceedings, watched from the front row as Prosecutor Thorne stood up. Thorne didn't use notes. He walked over to the exhibit table and picked up the battered Inogen 1G5. The plastic casing was still cracked from where Dylan had been forced to rip it from the overhead bin. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thorne began, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "The defense has spent days talking to you about turbulence. They have talked about FAA regulations regarding loose items. They have tried to paint the defendant as a strict adherent to the rules." Thorne walked to the jury box, holding the machine up like a lantern. "But let me ask you, is there a rule in any book, on any airline, in any country, that says you watch a child turn blue and do nothing? Is there a protocol that says you block a father from saving his dying son?" This wasn't about safety. If it were about safety, she would have helped. This was about power. He turned and pointed a finger directly at Brianna. She flinched. Brianna Miller decided that her authority was more important than Jordan Washington's life. She decided that her need to be right outweighed his need to breathe. That is not a job description. That is a crime. It is depraved. It is cruel. And today, it ends. The jury, 7 women and 5 men, were sent out to deliberate. The pundits on TV predicted a long deliberation. They said the technicalities of aviation law were tricky. They were wrong. The jury was back in 90 minutes. When the bailiff announced that a verdict had been reached, a collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Brianna's head snapped up. Her lawyer, a tired public defender who knew he was fighting a losing battle, placed a hand on her shoulder. She shrugged it off. Judge Harrow, a man known for his harsh sentences and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, took the bench. "Will the defendant please rise?" Brianna stood up. Her legs were shaky. She grabbed the table for support. The foreman, a middle-aged school teacher, stood with the verdict slip. Her hands were steady. She looked directly at Brianna. "In the case of the United States of America versus Brianna Miller, we find the defendant." The silence stretched, agonizing and thick. "Guilty on count 1, interference with flight crew members and attendants. Guilty on count 2, reckless endangerment of a minor. Guilty on count 3, assault with a dangerous weapon within aircraft jurisdiction. Guilty on count 4, violation of the Air Carrier Access Act resulting in bodily harm." 4 counts. 4 guilty verdicts. Brianna let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. "No," she whispered, loud enough for the microphones to catch. I was just doing my job. Judge Harrow looked down at her over his spectacles. He cleared his throat. Miss Miller, you may remain seated. I am not going to delay sentencing. I have heard the evidence. I have seen the video. I have looked into the eyes of that young man. The judge leaned forward. In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen drug dealers, bank robbers, and murderers. But I have rarely seen such callousness from someone in a position of trust. You turned a pressurized tube at 30,000 feet into a cage. You treated a medical device like contraband and a child like a nuisance. You claim you were following the manual, Judge Harrow continued, his voice rising. But there is a higher law, Miss Miller. The law of basic humanity. You violated that law with enthusiasm. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. You are to serve 85% of your sentence before being eligible for supervised release. Furthermore, upon your release, you are permanently banned from commercial air travel within the United States. You will never hold authority over another passenger again. The gavel slammed down a thunderclap that signaled the end of Brianna's life as she knew it. Marshals moved in immediately. They pulled Brianna's hands behind her back. The click of the handcuffs was the only sound in the room. As they led her away, she looked back at the gallery. She looked for a sympathetic face, a friend, a colleague, anyone. She found none. She saw only the cold lenses of cameras and the stony face of Dylan Washington. Dylan didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. It was just the end of a nightmare. He reached over and took Jordan's hand. "It's over, son," he whispered. "She can't hurt you anymore." But the legal hammer was only the first blow. The financial hammer fell next. The civil trial against Global Air never made it to court. Terrified of the PR apocalypse that a public trial would bring, the airline's board of directors authorized a settlement that shattered records. 3 weeks after the criminal verdict, Global Air agreed to pay the Washington family $52 million in damages. It was one of the largest settlements for an in-flight injury in aviation history. But Dylan Washington hadn't fought this battle just for a check. He wanted change. Part of the settlement required Global Air to overhaul their entire training program. They were forced to implement the Jordan Protocol, a mandatory training module for all 25,000 employees regarding the handling of medical devices and passengers with disabilities. Dylan took the money and went to work. He founded the Breathe Easy Foundation, an organization that instantly became the largest donor for cystic fibrosis research in the South. He bought a facility in Atlanta and turned it into a specialized respiratory rehabilitation center for low-income children, where no one was ever told to wait for oxygen. Jordan, though permanently scarred by the event, found a new voice. He couldn't play football anymore, and he couldn't run track, but he could speak. He became a fixture in Washington, D.C., lobbying alongside his father. His testimony before the Senate Transportation Committee was instrumental in passing the Washington Act. The law made it a federal felony for any airline employee to separate a passenger from a life-sustaining medical device, stripping the ambiguity from the manuals that Brianna had hidden behind. And Brianna Miller was transferred to the FCI Aliceville, a low-security federal correctional institution in Alabama. But prison is not kind to those who hurt children. Her fame had followed her inside. She works in the prison laundry, folding sheets for 12 cents an hour. It is hot, humid, work-stifling. In fact, the ventilation in the laundry room is poor. Sometimes, when the steam presses are running full blast, the air gets heavy and thick. It becomes hard to catch a breath. Every day, as Brianna gasps for fresh air in the sweltering heat of the laundry room, she feels a tightness in her chest. She feels the panic of not getting enough oxygen. And in those moments, she remembers the boy in seat 4A. She remembers his blue lips. She remembers the way she blocked the bin. The world moved on, but karma did not. Brianna Miller is grounded forever, living out her days in a cage of her own making, breathing the heavy air of regret, one shallow gasp at a time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the friendly skies turned into a courtroom of ultimate justice. Brianna Miller thought her badge gave her the power of a god, but she learned the hard way that when you come for a child, you don't just fight a father, you fight the world. She lost her freedom, her career, and her name, while Jordan and Dylan turned their tragedy into a shield that protects millions of us today. If you believe Brianna got exactly what she deserved, smash that like button and let me know in the comments. Was 15 years enough, or should it have been more? This story is a reminder that authority without empathy is just tyranny. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story where the bad guys finally get what's coming to them. Stay safe, be kind, and keep your cameras rolling. You never know when you might need to save a life. See you in the next video.